on climate change. One intervention equals to intervention, and this comes from His Excellency Benjamin Kalu, Nigeria.
Thank you very much, Mr. President and honorable colleagues. Let me also thank you, the presenter. It is obvious that across the length and breadth of our continent, the losses suffered from climate change is unquantifiable. But the loss of life is the one that is hard to bear. Whether it is in Nigeria, in Mali, in Niger, the Central African Republic, in Cote d'Ivoire, in Democratic Republic of Congo, in Togo, in South Sudan, in Chad, and Liberia. You see our brothers and our sisters weeping for the dead lost through the consequences of climate change. Currently, Nigeria is going through one of the worst times in our history. I was not supposed to be here, but because of the all-important nature of this gathering, I was sent to come and represent the speaker. For these ones we have lost through the consequences of climate change, I would like to request humbly that as leaders of this continent, that will spare 1 minute silence for the dead who died out of the consequences of climate change. Mr. President, if you may allow, that will give 1 minute silence to the dead one standing up.
Oh, accept it. Yeah, 1 minute.
May the soul of the departed rest in perfect peace. Amen.
Amen.
Mr. President, honorable colleagues, let me say that this presentation highlights in great extent, or to a great extent, what we are passing through in real terms as consequences of climate change. I remember in the time past when Vice President Al Gore started shouting about climate change, a lot of people didn't believe him. Some people argued that it was not real. But the chicken has gone home to roast. We are experiencing the impact of climate change all across the world, and Africa is not left out. In Nigeria recently, climate change induced flooding that affected Borno State, Yobe, and Adamawa State. Mr. President left with us an unprecedented humanitarian crisis that has dealt a heavy blow on our infrastructure and our economy. It will be very wrong for me to be here and not highlight what Nigeria is passing through at the moment. From August to September 2024, Mr. President, honorable colleagues, this torrential rainfall and the subsequent breach of major dams caused severe flooding across these states I just mentioned. And also in combination with runoff from the Cameroonian highland, it overwhelmed the local capacities, causing a widespread destruction in communities facing extreme social economic challenges. Mr. President, honorable colleagues, this particular flood has displaced over 1 million people in one state, and tens of thousands of families without shelter, without food, without clean water, and access to health care. Socio-economically speaking and infrastructure-wise, Mr. President, my people has lost, livelihood. There's a loss of livelihood. Agriculture being the backbone of those local communities has been decimated. Mr. President, thousands of hectares of farmland has been washed away, threatening food security and economic stability of many families. Mr. President, what the President said is true. The consequences, one of the consequences of climate change is job losses. In addition to the agricultural losses, the destruction of infrastructure has crippled local businesses within this area. And you know the SME, like I've always said, like you know, is the major contributor to the reduction of unemployment queue in the continent. And there is infrastructure destruction. Key roads, bridges have been broken down by this. Impact on education is huge because most of the education facilities are being used now as IDP centers to house the displaced people. We have a major problem we are sitting with in Nigeria, and please bear with me to highlight it a little more. Mr. President, the estimated cost of the humanitarian response and infrastructure investment at the in Nigeria now for this Borno State flood impact is affects shelter, affects food supply, it affects medical care, affects clean water, affects non-food items. And when we estimated it, we are seeing a little above $200 million is needed to be able to bring the place back to shape. Mr. President, the health consequences from cholera because of the flooding is also what is going to shock us in the coming days. And that is why we are coming here to let you know that there is a need for us as a continent to come together, to have a deliberate, intentional approach to be able to go into mitigating, whether it is by mitigation or adaptation, you know, for us to take it more seriously than we have done before now. And how do we go about it, like he has mentioned? I want to contribute that it is important that African Union have a set out methods that they put in place in taking care of these for the future. And this will lead me to these questions, Mr. President, to the presenter. How is the African Union working to ensure a coordinated continental response to climate change-induced crises, such as the recent flooding in Nigerian state? Are there specific intervention frameworks in place? Mr. President and Mr. Presenter, on mobilizing resources for climate adaptation, what mechanisms does the African Union have for mobilizing financial and technical resources for member states facing climate-related disasters like Nigeria? Are there any regional climate resilience funds, like we have peace funds, or partnership between being activated to support affected regions like Nigeria at the moment? On AU disaster preparedness and risk management strategies, Mr. Presenter, I want to ask what progress has been made in implementing the AU's disaster preparedness and risk management strategies? How can these be strengthened to address the increasing frequency of climate change-induced floods across the continent? Addressing climate-induced displacement, with over 1 million people displaced in Borno State alone in my country, what specific action is the African Union taking to assist with internal displacement caused by climate change events? How can the AU ensure that the displaced population have access to food, have access to shelter, have access to healthcare, have access to education? Because if it is EU will have a provision for this. So this is me calling for help, giving visibility to what is happening in Nigeria, in Borno State. That is a disaster area at the moment. And we need all hands, both AU and other international organizations, to come on board to help Nigeria, because the problem will spill into other nations if it is not taken care of. Remember, COVID, we were told here by the health professional, is still hanging there. MPOS is still hanging there, monkeypox, and other diseases that might become an epidemic situation for Africa. It's a problem for Nigeria, but one problem for one country in Africa is a problem for the entire continent. Thank you very much for listening, and hoping that we'll have a response that will suit the needs of my people. Thank you.